The sun hung low over the Colorado plains like a burning coal, painting the cracked earth in shades of rust and amber. Red rock formations jutted from the ground like ancient bones, their shadows stretching long across the dusty expanse. The wind carried grit and sage, whistling through the narrow streets of Willow Creek, a town that seemed to huddle against the vastness of the frontier as if seeking shelter from its own insignificance. Clara Whitmore pressed herself deeper into the shadows of the church doorway, watching the townspeople pass by through the narrow gap between her bonnet and shawl. At 23, she had learned to make herself invisible, to move through the world like a ghost haunting her own life. The thick fabric of her bonnet cast her face in perpetual shadow, hiding what the fire had left behind 7 years ago. Inside the small church, Father Morrison lay dying. The old priest had taken her in when she'd stumbled into town 3 years prior, half dead from exposure and grief. He'd never asked about the bonnet she refused to remove, never pressed her about the nightmares that woke her screaming, never questioned why she flinched when anyone came too close. He'd simply given her a corner in the church's back room and worked to occupy her hands, mending vestments, cleaning the sanctuary, preparing simple meals. "Clara," his voice rasped from the narrow bed. She moved to his side, her footsteps silent on the worn wooden floor. Even now, even with him, she kept the bonnet firmly in place. "I'm here, Father." His papery hand found hers. "Child, I've made arrangements. Mrs. Hartley. She knows of work. A ranch up in the high country. Good man needs help with the house." Clara's chest tightened. The thought of leaving this sanctuary, of facing the world beyond these walls, made her stomach churn. "I can stay. The new priest—" "There won't be one." Father Morrison's eyes, clouded with pain, held sympathy. "Diocese is closing the church. Not enough souls left in Willow Creek to justify it." He squeezed her hand weakly. "This is God's way of pushing you back into the world. Child, you can't hide forever." But Clara knew better. She could hide forever. She had to. The alternative, letting people see what she'd become, was unthinkable. Father Morrison died as the sun set, his last breath leaving him as the church bells tolled the evening hour. Clara sat with him until his body grew cold, then carefully closed his eyes and folded his hands across his chest. By morning, the undertaker had come, and by afternoon, Mrs. Hartley appeared at the church door. The older woman was built like a fence post, straight, sturdy, and weathered by years on the frontier. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her eyes held kindness. "You're Clara," she said. Not a question, but a statement. "Father Morrison spoke of you. Said you're a hard worker, quiet, keep to yourself." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Elias Boone needs a housekeeper. Ranch is 2 days north, up near Redemption Pass, isolated. He won't bother you none. Man barely speaks since his wife passed. Pays fair, room and board included." Mrs. Hartley studied what little she could see of Clara's face beneath the bonnet. "Father Morrison said you'd be suitable. Said you know how to keep a house and mind your own business." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Hartley nodded briskly. "Stage leaves tomorrow morning. Be at the depot by 7. That night, Clara packed her few belongings, 2 dresses, both brown and shapeless, a Bible Father Morrison had given her, extra bonnets, and the small leather pouch containing her mother's wedding ring. Everything else had burned. She sat in the empty church until dawn, memorizing the peaceful silence, the way moonlight filtered through the modest stained glass, the smell of beeswax and old wood. When the first light touched the horizon, she rose, pulled her bonnet low, and walked to the stage depot. The journey north was bone-jarring torture. The stagecoach bounced over rutted trails, dust seeping through every crack. Clara sat wedged between a drummer selling patent medicines and a woman with 3 small children. She kept her face turned to the window, watching the landscape change from prairie to foothills to proper mountains. Pine forests replaced sagebrush. The air grew thin and cold. They stopped overnight in a rough mining town where Clara huddled in her tiny room, eating the bread and cheese she'd packed rather than venturing to the common room. The walls were thin, and the sounds of drinking and carousing kept her awake, reminding her too much of her father's rages, of the night the lantern had tipped, of the screaming. She pressed her palms against her ears and prayed for morning. The second day brought them higher still. The stage driver, a grizzled man who chewed tobacco constantly, called out landmarks. "That there's Devil's Backbone? Over yonder's where the Hayward party got stuck in the snow of '81, lost 12 folks." Finally, as afternoon shadows lengthened, they reached a crossroads marked by a weathered sign. Boone Ranch, 5 miles. The stage stopped just long enough for Clara to retrieve her carpet bag before rumbling on. She stood in the dust, watching it disappear around a bend, fighting the urge to run after it. A wagon waited by the sign, driven by a young man with sandy hair. "Miss Whitmore? I'm Tom. Mister. Boone sent me to fetch you." The road to the ranch was barely more than a track through the pines. They climbed steadily, the air growing colder, thinner. Clara pulled her shawl tighter and tried not to think about how far from anywhere she was going. When they finally emerged from the trees, the ranch spread before them, a collection of log buildings nestled in a high valley, mountains rising on all sides like fortress walls. The main house was solid, 2 stories of hewn logs with a stone chimney sending up a thread of smoke. Barns, corrals, and outbuildings clustered nearby. A few men worked with horses in the distance, but otherwise, the place seemed achingly empty. "Mister, Boone's likely in the barn," Tom said, pulling up near the house. "You can go on in. Kitchen's through the front room. Your quarters are off the back." Clara climbed down, bag in hand, and approached the house. The door was heavy, made to withstand winter storms. Inside, she found a masculine space, leather, wood, and stone. No softening touches, no woman's hand evident anywhere. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon light streaming through windows that needed washing. The kitchen was large but neglected. Dishes sat stacked haphazardly. The stove needed blacking. The floor hadn't seen a proper scrubbing in months. Clara set down her bag and automatically began assessing what needed doing. "You the new woman?" The deep voice made her spin around. In the doorway stood a man who seemed carved from the mountains themselves, tall, broad-shouldered, weathered. Elias Boone was perhaps 35, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore work clothes covered in hay dust, and his expression was as welcoming as granite. "Yes, sir, Clara Whitmore." He studied her, or tried to. The bonnet hid everything but her chin and mouth. "Tom, show you the room." "Not yet, sir." He jerked his head toward a door off the kitchen. "Through there. It's not much. Get settled. Breakfast needs to be ready by 5. Men eat at the bunkhouse, but I take mine here. Dinner's at 6. Washing on Mondays, baking on Wednesdays. Rest you can figure out." Without another word, he turned and left, his boots heavy on the floor. Clara released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. He hadn't tried to see her face, hadn't asked questions. Perhaps this would work after all. Her room was small but clean, a narrow bed with a corn husk mattress, a washstand, a single chair, and hooks on the wall for clothes. A small window looked out toward the mountains. After the church's back room, it felt almost luxurious. She unpacked quickly, hanging her spare dresses and bonnets, placing the Bible on the small shelf by the bed. The leather pouch with her mother's ring went under the mattress. Then she returned to the kitchen and set to work. By the time Elias Boone returned for dinner, the kitchen had been transformed. The stove gleamed. The floor was scrubbed. Fresh bread cooled on the table beside a pot of stew made from the beef and vegetables she'd found in the cold pantry. He stopped in the doorway, clearly surprised. Then he sat at the table without comment. Clara served him, keeping her face averted, and retreated to the far corner of the kitchen. "You not eating?" he asked. "I'll take mine later, sir." He grunted and applied himself to the meal. When he'd finished, he pushed back his chair. "That was good," he said, the words seeming pulled from him reluctantly. "Better than anything I've had in 2 years. 2 years since his wife died," Mrs. Hartley had said. Clara began clearing the dishes. "Thank you, sir." He watched her for a moment, this woman who moved like a shadow through his kitchen, her face forever hidden beneath that deep bonnet. Then he stood and headed for the door. "I rise early. Coffee should be ready by 4:30. "Yes, sir." He paused at the threshold. "You don't need to call me sir. Elias is fine, or Mr. Boone if you prefer." "Yes, Mr. Boone?" She heard what might have been a sigh, then his footsteps retreating. Clara continued washing dishes, her hands steady in the soapy water, her mind already planning tomorrow's meals. She could do this. She could be invisible here, useful but unseen. The mountains would keep the world at bay, and her shame would remain hidden beneath the shadow of her bonnet. Outside, night settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, the sound echoing off the peaks. Clara shivered, not from cold but from the loneliness that seemed to press against the windows. She was safe here, she told herself, safe from prying eyes and pointing fingers. But safety and happiness were two different things, and as she prepared for bed in her small, plain room, Clara wondered if she would ever know the latter again. The mountains might hide her from the world, but they couldn't hide her from herself. In the darkness, her fingers traced the ridged skin of her left cheek, feeling the map of her destruction, the price of surviving what should have killed her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new ways to remain invisible. But tonight, in this strange place so far from everything she'd known, Clara Whitmore pulled her quilt up to her chin and tried not to dream of fire. The sun hung low over the Colorado plains like a burning coal, painting the cracked earth in shades of rust and amber. Red rock formations jutted from the ground like ancient bones, their shadows stretching long across the dusty expanse. The wind carried grit and sage, whistling through the narrow streets of Willow Creek, a town that seemed to huddle against the vastness of the frontier as if seeking shelter from its own insignificance. Clara Whitmore pressed herself deeper into the shadows of the church doorway, watching the townspeople pass by through the narrow gap between her bonnet and shawl. At 23, she had learned to make herself invisible, to move through the world like a ghost haunting her own life. The thick fabric of her bonnet cast her face in perpetual shadow, hiding what the fire had left behind 7 years ago. Inside the small church, Father Morrison lay dying. The old priest had taken her in when she'd stumbled into town 3 years prior, half dead from exposure and grief. He'd never asked about the bonnet she refused to remove, never pressed her about the nightmares that woke her screaming, never questioned why she flinched when anyone came too close. He'd simply given her a corner in the church's back room and worked to occupy her hands, mending vestments, cleaning the sanctuary, preparing simple meals. "Clara!" His voice rasped from the narrow bed. She moved to his side, her footsteps silent on the worn wooden floor. Even now, even with him, she kept the bonnet firmly in place. "I'm here, Father!" His papery hand found hers. "Child, I've made arrangements. Mrs. Hartley, she knows of work. A ranch up in the high country. Good man needs help with a house." Clara's chest tightened. The thought of leaving this sanctuary, of facing the world beyond these walls, made her stomach churn. "I can stay. The new priest." "There won't be one." Father Morrison's eyes, clouded with pain, held sympathy. "Diocese is closing the church. Not enough souls left in Willow Creek to justify it." He squeezed her hand weakly. "This is God's way of pushing you back into the world. Child, you can't hide forever." But Clara knew better. She could hide forever. She had to. The alternative, letting people see what she'd become, was unthinkable. Father Morrison died as the sun set, his last breath leaving him as the church bells tolled the evening hour. Clara sat with him until his body grew cold, then carefully closed his eyes and folded his hands across his chest. By morning, the undertaker had come, and by afternoon, Mrs. Hartley appeared at the church door. The older woman was built like a fence post, straight, sturdy, and weathered by years on the frontier. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her eyes held kindness. "You're Clara," she said. Not a question, but a statement. "Father Morrison spoke of you, said you're a hard worker, quiet, keep to yourself." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Elias Boone needs a housekeeper. Ranch is 2 days north, up near Redemption Pass. Isolated. He won't bother you none. Man barely speaks since his wife passed. Pays fair, room and board included." Mrs. Hartley studied what little she could see of Clara's face beneath the bonnet. "Father Morrison said you'd be suitable. Said you know how to keep a house and mind your own business." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Hartley nodded briskly. "Stage leaves tomorrow morning. Be at the depot by 7. That night, Clara packed her few belongings. 2 dresses, both brown and shapeless. A Bible Father Morrison had given her, extra bonnets, and the small leather pouch containing her mother's wedding ring. Everything else had burned. She sat in the empty church until dawn, memorizing the peaceful silence, the way moonlight filtered through the modest stained glass, the smell of beeswax and old wood. When the first light touched the horizon, she rose, pulled her bonnet low, and walked to the stage depot. The journey north was bone-jarring torture. The stagecoach bounced over rutted trails, dust seeping through every crack. Clara sat wedged between a drummer selling patent medicines and a woman with 3 small children. She kept her face turned to the window, watching the landscape change from prairie to foothills to proper mountains. Pine forests replaced sagebrush. The air grew thin and cold. They stopped overnight in a rough mining town where Clara huddled in her tiny room, eating the bread and cheese she'd packed rather than venturing to the common room. The walls were thin, and the sounds of drinking and carousing kept her awake, reminding her too much of her father's rages, of the night the lantern had tipped, of the screaming. She pressed her palms against her ears and prayed for morning. The second day brought them higher still. The stage driver, a grizzled man who chewed tobacco constantly, called out landmarks. "That there's Devil's Backbone. Over yonder's where the Hayward party got stuck in the snow of '81. Lost 12 folks. Finally, as afternoon shadows lengthened, they reached a crossroads marked by a weathered sign. Boone Ranch, 5 miles. The stage stopped just long enough for Clara to retrieve her carpet bag before rumbling on. She stood in the dust, watching it disappear around a bend, fighting the urge to run after it. A wagon waited by the sign, driven by a young man with sandy hair. "Miss Whitmore, I'm Tom, Mr. Boone sent me to fetch you." The road to the ranch was barely more than a track through the pines. They climbed steadily, the air growing colder, thinner. Clara pulled her shawl tighter and tried not to think about how far from anywhere she was going. When they finally emerged from the trees, the ranch spread before them, a collection of log buildings nestled in a high valley, mountains rising on all sides like fortress walls. The main house was solid, 2 stories of hewn logs with a stone chimney sending up a thread of smoke. Barns, corrals, and outbuildings clustered nearby. A few men worked with horses in the distance, but otherwise the place seemed achingly empty. "Mr. Boone's likely in the barn," Tom said, pulling up near the house. "You can go on in. Kitchen's through the front room. Your quarters are off the back." Clara climbed down, bag in hand, and approached the house. The door was heavy, made to withstand winter storms. Inside, she found a masculine space, leather, wood, and stone. No softening touches, no woman's hand evident anywhere. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon light streaming through windows that needed washing. The kitchen was large but neglected. Dishes sat stacked haphazardly. The stove needed blacking. The floor hadn't seen a proper scrubbing in months. Clara set down her bag and automatically began assessing what needed doing. "You, the new woman?" The deep voice made her spin around. In the doorway stood a man who seemed carved from the mountains themselves, tall, broad-shouldered, weathered. Elias Boone was perhaps 35, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore work clothes covered in hay dust, and his expression was as welcoming as granite. "Yes, sir, Clara Whitmore." He studied her, or tried to. The bonnet hid everything but her chin and mouth. Tom, show you the room? Not yet, sir. He jerked his head toward a door off the kitchen. Through there. It's not much. Get settled. Breakfast needs to be ready by 5. Men eat at the bunkhouse, but I take mine here. Dinner's at 6. Washing on Mondays, baking on Wednesdays. Rest you can figure out. Without another word, he turned and left, his boots heavy on the floor. Clara released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. He hadn't tried to see her face, hadn't asked questions. Perhaps this would work after all. Her room was small but clean, a narrow bed with a corn husk mattress, a washstand, a single chair, and hooks on the wall for clothes. A small window looked out toward the mountains. After the church's back room, it felt almost luxurious. She unpacked quickly, hanging her spare dresses and bonnets, placing the Bible on the small shelf by the bed. The leather pouch with her mother's ring went under the mattress. Then she returned to the kitchen and set to work. By the time Elias Boone returned for dinner, the kitchen had been transformed. The stove gleamed. The floor was scrubbed. Fresh bread cooled on the table beside a pot of stew made from the beef and vegetables she'd found in the cold pantry. He stopped in the doorway, clearly surprised. Then he sat at the table without comment. Clara served him, keeping her face averted, and retreated to the far corner of the kitchen. "You not eating?" he asked. "I'll take mine later, sir." He grunted and applied himself to the meal. When he'd finished, he pushed back his chair. "That was good," he said, the words seeming pulled from him reluctantly. "Better than anything I've had in 2 years. 2 years, since his wife died, Mrs. Hartley had said. Clara began clearing the dishes. "Thank you, sir." He watched her for a moment. This woman who moved like a shadow through his kitchen, her face forever hidden beneath that deep bonnet. Then he stood and headed for the door. "I rise early." "Coffee should be ready by 4:30. "Yes, sir." He paused at the threshold. "You don't need to call me sir. Elias is fine. Or Mr. Boone, if you prefer." "Yes, Mr. Boone." She heard what might have been a sigh, then his footsteps retreating. Clara continued washing dishes, her hands steady in the soapy water, her mind already planning tomorrow's meals. She could do this. She could be invisible here, useful but unseen. The mountains would keep the world at bay, and her shame would remain hidden beneath the shadow of her bonnet. Outside, night settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, the sound echoing off the peaks. Clara shivered, not from cold, but from the loneliness that seemed to press against the windows. She was safe here, she told herself, safe from prying eyes and pointing fingers. But safety and happiness were two different things, and as she prepared for bed in her small, plain room, Clara wondered if she would ever know the latter again. The mountains might hide her from the world, but they couldn't hide her from herself. In the darkness, her fingers traced the ridged skin of her left cheek, feeling the map of her destruction, the price of surviving what should have killed her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new ways to remain invisible. But tonight, in this strange place so far from everything she'd known, Clara Whitmore pulled her quilt up to her chin and tried not to dream of fire. The days after the blizzard carried a different quality, like air charged before lightning strikes. Clara still wore her bonnet, but something fundamental had shifted. When she served Elias his meals, she no longer turned completely away. When he spoke, she answered with more than monosyllables. They existed in the same space without the careful choreography of avoidance. Small kindnesses bloomed between them. Elias began leaving split kindling by the stove each evening, saving her the morning struggle with the axe. Clara started adding touches to his simple meals, herbs from the dried bundles in the pantry, a dollop of preserves with his biscuits. Neither acknowledged these gestures aloud, but both noticed. The checkerboard became a nightly ritual when Elias wasn't out with the cattle. They played by lamplight while winter tightened its grip on the mountains. Sometimes they talked, safe topics like the ranch, the weather, books they'd read. Sometimes they sat in companionable silence. The only sounds the pop of the fire and the click of wooden pieces on the board. One evening, Clara found herself laughing at a story about one of the horses. The sound surprised them both, rusty from disuse but genuine. Elias's face softened in a way that made him look younger. "You should do that more often," he said quietly. She ducked her head, but the warmth in her chest lingered. The nightmare came 3 weeks after the blizzard. Clara woke to terrible sounds, groaning, thrashing, words torn from sleep. Without thinking, she grabbed her shawl and hurried to Elias's room. He was tangled in his quilts, face contorted, calling a name over and over. "Maggie, no, the blood. I can't stop it." Clara hesitated at the threshold, then moved to the bedside. "Mr. Boone, Elias, wake up!" He thrashed harder. She reached out tentatively, touching his shoulder. "Elias, it's a dream. You're dreaming." His hand shot out, gripping hers with desperate strength. His eyes flew open, unseeing. "Don't leave me," he gasped. "Please don't leave me alone." "I'm here," Clara said, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "You're not alone." Gradually, his breathing slowed. Awareness crept back into his eyes. He realized he was clutching her hand and started to let go, but she surprised herself by holding on. "Bad dream?" she asked unnecessarily. He nodded, hair damp with sweat. "They come sometimes, less than they used to." He studied her face in the moonlight filtering through the window. Her bonnet was absent, left behind in her haste. "I'm sorry I woke you. Don't be." They sat in the darkness, her hand in his, while his breathing steadied. Neither spoke of the intimacy of the moment. Her in his bedroom, him vulnerable from sleep terrors, skin touching skin without the buffer of propriety. Finally, Clara squeezed his fingers gently and stood. "Try to rest. Morning comes early." At breakfast, neither mentioned the night, but something had shifted again. The careful distance they maintained seemed foolish now, like closing the barn door after the horses had fled. That afternoon, while Clara kneaded bread, Elias appeared in the kitchen doorway. Usually, he'd state his business and leave. This time, he lingered. "Taught myself to bake when I first came here," he said, watching her work the dough. "Never could get the bread to rise proper, like eating hardtack most days. The trick is keeping the yeast warm," Clara said, folding and pressing. "And patience. Can't rush bread." "Could I?" He cleared his throat. "Would you show me?" She looked up, startled. "You want to learn? Might be useful. If someday." He trailed off, but she understood. If she left, the thought sat heavy between them. "Of course," she said softly. He moved beside her at the table, rolling up his sleeves. She showed him how to test the yeast, how to work the dough without overhandling it. Their hands occasionally brushed as she guided his movements. She became acutely aware of his presence, the warmth radiating from him, the way he concentrated with a small furrow between his brows, the careful way he followed her instructions. "Like this." He pushed the heel of his palm into the dough. "More from the shoulders. Use your weight." She reached to adjust his hands and found herself close enough to smell the soap he used, the hint of leather and pine. Her breath caught. They both stilled. Clara's hands rested over his on the dough. The kitchen was warm from the stove, but the heat she felt had nothing to do with the fire. Slowly, she stepped back. "You've got it," she said, voice not quite steady. "Just keep that rhythm." He worked the dough in silence while she busied herself unnecessarily with the dishes. When he'd shaped the loaves and set them to rise, he washed his hands and turned to her. "Clara." She kept her back to him, scrubbing a pot that was already clean. "Yes? Look at me, please." She turned reluctantly. Her bonnet was askew from the bread making, and flour dusted her cheeks. He stepped closer, raising his hand as if to brush the flour away, then caught himself. "I need to say something," he began. "These past weeks, I've been dead inside for 2 years, going through motions, keeping the ranch running but not living. Then you came, and something started waking up. I don't know what this is between us. Don't know if I'm ready for it. But I need you to know. It's not gratitude for the cooking or the clean house. It's not loneliness making me imagine things. It's... He struggled for words. You make me remember I'm still alive. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Elias, I can't be what you need. I'm broken, damaged. People see me and they... I see you, he interrupted fiercely. Not the scar. You, the woman who faces each day with quiet courage. Who brings beauty to this God-forsaken place without even trying. Who pulled me out of that blizzard and sits with me through nightmares. He took a breath. I see you. Clara Whitmore. And what I see is remarkable. Tears burned her eyes. You don't understand. In town, people would stare. They'd whisper. They'd pity you for settling for someone so disfigured. Then we won't go to town. You can't live that way. Isolated because of me. I've been isolated for 2 years by choice. With you here, it doesn't feel isolated anymore. She shook her head, backing away. This is impossible. I'm your housekeeper. You're still grieving your wife. We can't. I know. His voice was raw. I know all the reasons this is foolish, but knowing doesn't change what I feel when you're near. Doesn't stop me from listening for your footsteps in the morning or finding excuses to come in from the barn. He ran a hand through his hair. I'm not asking for anything. Just needed you to know. Needed to be honest. Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks. No one had ever looked past her scars to see her, really see her. She wanted to run, to hide, to protect them both from the impossibility of what was growing between them. Instead, she stood frozen as Elias moved closer. May I? His hand hovered near her face. She couldn't speak, could only nod minutely. With infinite gentleness, he pulled her bonnet back, letting it fall to her shoulders. His fingertips traced the air above her scar, not quite touching. Beautiful, he murmured. All of you. Beautiful. A sob escaped her. He pulled her against his chest, and she collapsed into him, crying for all the years of hiding, for the girl she'd been before the fire, for the impossible sweetness of being held by someone who saw her fully and didn't turn away. He stroked her hair, murmuring nonsense comfort words while she wept. When the storm passed, she rested against him, exhausted. Neither moved to break the embrace. What happens now? She whispered into his shirt. I don't know. His arms tightened around her. But we don't have to figure it out today, or tomorrow. We have time. The bread timer chimed, breaking the spell. Clara pulled away, wiping her eyes. Elias caught her hand before she could replace the bonnet. Leave it off, he said softly. Just here, just with me, if you want. She hesitated, then nodded. They worked side by side to get the bread in the oven, moving around each other with new awareness. Every accidental touch sparked like flint on steel. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Clara found herself stealing glances at him. He was reading, spectacles perched on his nose, a detail that somehow made him more human, more dear. He looked up, catching her gaze, and smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. What? He asked. Nothing, just, this is nice. It is. The fire crackled. Wind sang through the pines outside. Inside, 2 wounded souls sat in peaceful companionship, no longer quite so alone. The space between them hummed with possibility and fear and something that might, given time and courage, grow into love. When Clara bid him good night and retreated to her room, she left her bonnet hanging on the kitchen chair. It was a small act of trust, a tiny rebellion against the shame that had ruled her for so long. In her narrow bed, she touched her scar and thought of how Elias had called her beautiful. For the first time in 7 years, she began to believe that might be possible. Spring came late to the mountains that year, creeping down from the peaks in fits and starts. One day would bring warm Chinook winds, the next, fresh snow. Clara had learned to read the signs, the way the horses grew restless before a storm, how the sunrise painted the clouds when change was coming. She'd also learned to read Elias, The way his jaw tightened when his back pained him from old injuries. How his eyes softened when he thought she wasn't looking. The careful distance he maintained even as everything in him seemed to lean toward her like a plant seeking sun. The fever struck without warning on a Tuesday night in early April. Clara had felt tired all day, a bone-deep weariness she attributed to the heavy washing. By evening, her head pounded and her skin felt too tight. She served dinner mechanically, grateful when Elias didn't linger for their usual evening of checkers and quiet conversation. In her room, she collapsed onto the bed fully dressed, shivering despite the relatively mild night. Sleep came in fragments, punctuated by dreams of fire, not the terror of memory, but strange, fevered visions where flames danced like living things, beautiful and terrible. She woke to worried voices and gentle hands. Someone was pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. She tried to speak, but only managed a croak. "Shh, don't try to talk." Elias's voice tight with concern. "Tom's gone for the doctor, but it'll be hours in this weather." She forced her eyes open. His face swam into focus, lined with worry. Behind him, dawn light filtered through her small window. She'd lost a whole night. "Just rest," he murmured, adjusting the cloth. "I've got you." The fever worsened as the day progressed. Clara drifted between waking and sleeping, aware sometimes of Elias beside her, coaxing spoonfuls of broth between her lips, changing the cool cloths, murmuring reassurances. Once, in a moment of clarity, she realized her bonnet was gone, her hair spread loose on the pillow, her scar fully visible. She tried to turn her face away. "Don't," Elias said softly, catching her chin gently. "Never hide from me?" She wanted to protest, to explain that old habits died hard, but the fever pulled her under again. In her delirium, she called for her mother, cried out warnings about the fire, reached for people long dead. Through it all, a steady presence anchored her. Warm hands, quiet voice, someone who refused to leave no matter how she thrashed or wept. "Eli," she mumbled at one point, the shortened name slipping out without thought. "I'm here." His fingers smoothed her tangled hair. "I'm right here, sweetheart." Even through the fever, the endearment registered. She clutched at his hand with what little strength she had. "Don't go. Never," he promised. "Sleep now. I'll be here when you wake." The fever broke near dawn on the second day. Clara surfaced slowly, like swimming up from deep water. Her nightgown was soaked with sweat, her hair matted, but her mind was clear. She turned her head to find Elias slumped in the chair beside her bed, one hand still holding hers, his head resting on his other arm. He looked exhausted, his clothes rumpled, dark shadows under his eyes. She squeezed his fingers weakly. He jerked awake instantly. "Clara?" Hope and relief warred in his expression. He pressed his free hand to her forehead. "Fever's broken. Thank God." His voice cracked on the last word. "Water?" she whispered. He helped her sit up, supporting her while she sipped from a cup. The simple act exhausted her, but she felt human again. "How long?" 2 days, longest 2 days of my life since—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Doctor came, said to keep you cool and hydrated. Pray the fever didn't settle in your lungs. Looks like prayers worked." She studied him, the stubble darkening his jaw, the way his hair stuck up at odd angles, the tender concern in his eyes. "You stayed the whole time? Where else would I be?" The simple question undid her. Tears slipped down her cheeks, whether from weakness or emotion she couldn't say. Elias wiped them away with his thumb, the gesture so gentle it made her cry harder. "Hey now," he soothed. "You're all right. You're going to be fine." "I called you Eli," she said, remembering fragments through the haze. A smile tugged at his mouth. "You did. Also told me about your secret stash of penny novels under your mattress and your opinion of my coffee," which was not flattering. Despite her exhaustion, she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Oh no. My favorite was when you insisted on explaining the proper way to darn socks, very detailed. Went on for about an hour." She groaned, covering her face with her hands. He caught her wrists gently, pulling them away. "Clara," his voice went serious, "you scared me. When Tom came running, said you wouldn't wake up. I thought—" He swallowed hard. "I can't lose anyone else. I can't lose you." The air between them crackled with unspoken things. Clara felt herself swaying toward him, drawn by something stronger than propriety or fear. He leaned closer, his breath warm on her face. "I should let you rest," he said, but made no move to pull away. "I've been resting for 2 days. The doctor said—" "Elias." She freed one hand to touch his face, feeling the rasp of stubble. "Thank you. For staying. For everything." He turned his head to press a kiss to her palm, the gesture sending sparks through her whole body. Their eyes met and held, slowly, giving her time to pull away. He leaned down. The kiss was gentle, barely a brush of lips, but Clara felt it in her bones. All the careful distance they'd maintained, all the reasons this was impossible, fell away. There was only this, the two of them in the morning light, alive and together. When they parted, both were breathing unsteadily. Elias rested his forehead against hers. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have. You're still weak." She silenced him with another kiss, this one longer, deeper. When they broke apart this time, she was smiling despite her exhaustion. "Stop apologizing," she whispered. He laughed, the sound rusty but real. "Yes, ma'am." He helped her change into a clean nightgown, keeping his eyes averted despite the new intimacy between them. When she was settled with fresh pillows and blankets, he sat on the edge of the bed. "This changes things," he said quietly. "I know. I don't know how to do this. Clara, I haven't, not since Maggie." She took his hand. "We'll figure it out, together." He brought her fingers to his lips. "Together." He agreed. Over the next days, as Clara recovered her strength, they found a new rhythm. The careful barriers were gone, replaced by small touches, his hand on her waist as he helped her to the kitchen, her fingers brushing his as she passed him coffee. They talked more freely, sharing pieces of their past they'd held back. "I wanted to be a teacher," Clara confessed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching sunset paint the mountains. "Had a position lined up in Springfield. Then the fire." She touched her face unconsciously. "You'd have been a good teacher." Elias said, "Patient, kind. You still could be." She shook her head. "Children would be frightened." "Our children wouldn't be—" The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Clara's breath caught. "Elias, I know it's too soon. I know we're not, but someday. Maybe, if you wanted." He was flustered in a way she'd never seen. This man who faced down blizzards and wild horses with calm competence. She leaned into his side, feeling his arm come around her. "Someday," she said softly. "Maybe." They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged overhead. Inside the house she'd first entered as a stranger, Clara felt something she'd thought lost forever, the possibility of a future not defined by tragedy but by choice, by hope, by the careful building of love from the ashes of loss. "Are you cold?" Elias asked, feeling her shiver. "No," she said, though the mountain air was cooling rapidly. She didn't want this moment to end, this perfect balance between what was and what might be. He pressed a kiss to her temple, just above where the scar began. "Stubborn woman." "You like that about me." "I do," he admitted. "God help me, I do." They went inside eventually, driven by the dropping temperature. As Clara prepared for bed, in her own room still, that barrier not yet crossed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. Her face was thinner from the fever, her scar as prominent as ever. But something in her eyes had changed. Where once there was only shame and shadows, now there was light. Hope was a dangerous thing for someone who'd lost everything. But as she braided her hair and banked the fire, Clara allowed herself to nurture that small flame. Tomorrow would bring challenges. There was still the ranch to run, the judgment of the outside world to consider, the ghosts of their pasts to navigate. But tonight, She'd been kissed by a man who saw her truly and wanted her anyway. It was enough. It was everything. It was a beginning. The summer days stretched long and golden across the ranch, bringing with them a sweetness Clara had never known. She and Elias moved around each other with new awareness, every glance and touch charged with meaning. The boundaries between employer and employee had dissolved, replaced by something deeper yet unspoken in its fullness. Their moments of privacy became precious. In the early mornings before the ranch hands stirred, they'd share coffee on the porch, shoulders touching, watching the sun paint the peaks rose and gold. During the day, when Elias came in from the fields, Clara would pause in her work to bring him cool water, their fingers lingering as the cup passed between them. Evenings found them walking along the creek that bordered the property, talking or simply being together in comfortable silence. It was during one of these walks, as purple dusk settled over the mountains, that Elias stopped beneath a stand of aspens. Their leaves whispered secrets in the breeze. "Clara," he said, turning to face her, "I need to say something." Her heart stuttered, but she kept her voice steady. "What is it?" He took her hands in his, calloused thumbs stroking over her knuckles. "If you let me see you, really see you, I promise I'll never look away. Not from any part of you." She understood what he was asking, what he was offering. The scar that defined so much of her life suddenly seemed less important than the warmth in his eyes, the steady strength of his hands holding hers. "Elias," she whispered, but he wasn't finished. "I know we've been careful, dancing around this thing between us, but I'm tired of being careful. I've spent 2 years dead inside, and now—" He drew a shaky breath. "Now I want to live again. With you, if you'll have me." Clara felt tears threaten. "I want that too, but I'm still—" "Perfect," he interrupted. "You're perfect as you are." She shook her head, even as her heart swelled. "I'm not—" "To me you are." He released one of her hands to cup her scarred cheek, his touch infinitely gentle. "Let me show you. Let me love you the way you deserve." The word hung between them. Love. Neither had said it before, though it had lived in their looks and touches for weeks. "You love me?" Clara's voice was barely a breath. "I do. Simple, certain, devastating in its honesty. I love your strength and your gentleness. I love how you hum when you're happy and how you bite your lip when you're concentrating. I love your courage and your kindness, and yes, I even love your stubbornness." His thumb traced the edge of her scar. "I love all of you, Clara, the parts you show the world and the parts you try to hide. If you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my days proving it." Clara was crying now, tears streaming unchecked. No one had ever seen her so completely, accepted her so wholly. She reached up to cover his hand with hers, pressing it against her damaged cheek. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't think I could, after everything, but I do. I love you, Eli." He made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob, then pulled her against him. Their lips met with desperate tenderness, all the careful restraint of the past months falling away. Clara pressed closer, her arms winding around his neck as he deepened the kiss. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Come with me," Elias said, his voice rough. "Please." She knew what he was asking. They'd maintained proper boundaries despite their feelings, but standing there in the gathering dark with love spoken between them, those boundaries seemed foolish. "Yes," she said simply. Hand in hand, they walked back to the house. The ranch was quiet. The hands settled in the bunkhouse for the night. Inside, Elias lit a lamp with shaking fingers, then turned to her. "We don't have to, if you're not ready." Clara silenced him by reaching up to unpin her hair, letting the dark waves tumble free. Then, with deliberate slowness, she began unbuttoning her dress. "Clara," he breathed. "I want you to see me," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "All of me, and I want to see you too." What followed was achingly tender. In the soft lamplight, They revealed themselves to each other, not just skin and scars, but souls laid bare. Elias traced every mark on her body with reverent fingers and lips, murmuring words of love and worship until Clara believed them. When they came together at last, it was with tears and whispered promises, two broken people making each other whole. Afterward, they lay entwined in his bed, Clara's head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. His fingers combed through her hair while she traced idle patterns on his skin. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. "None," she said, meaning it. "You? Only that I waited so long to tell you how I felt." She pressed a kiss to his chest. "We have time now." "All the time in the world," he agreed, tightening his arms around her. They dozed, woke to love again with less desperation and more joy, then talked in whispers as dawn approached. "What happens now?" Clara asked, practical concerns intruding on their perfect bubble. "Now I make an honest woman of you." Elias said, "If you'll marry me." She propped herself up to look at him. "Elias Boone, is that a proposal?" "It's a terrible one." He admitted, "You deserve flowers and pretty words and me on one knee. But yes, it's a proposal. Marry me, Clara. Be my wife, my partner, my everything." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, of course, yes." He kissed her thoroughly, then pulled back with a grin. "I'll ride to town tomorrow. Talk to the preacher. We can be married by week's end if you like." Reality intruded with his words. Town, where people would stare and whisper, where their happiness would be subjected to judgment and speculation. "Clara," Elias felt her tense. "What is it?" "People will talk," she said quietly. "They'll say you're settling, that you could do better." "Let them talk." His voice was fierce. "Anyone who looks at you and sees anything less than the incredible woman you are is a fool whose opinion means nothing to me. It's not just about you. They'll wonder why you hired a scarred woman, what went on here before we married. Then we'll tell them the truth, that I hired a housekeeper and fell in love with her, that she brought light back to my life when I thought I'd live in darkness forever." He tilted her chin up. "I'm not ashamed of loving you. Clara, are you ashamed of loving me?" "Never," she said immediately. "Then that's all that matters." But Clara knew the world was rarely that simple. Her fears proved founded when Elias returned from town the next day, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. "What happened?" she asked, though she could guess. "Nothing important," he said, but she knew him too well now to be fooled. "Elias," he sighed, sinking into a kitchen chair. "There was talk. Some fool made a comment about my charity case. I may have bloodied his nose." "Oh, Eli." She moved behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "You can't fight everyone who says something cruel." "Watch me," he muttered, then twisted to look up at her. "I won't let anyone hurt you, Clara, not with words or anything else." She kissed his forehead. "I know, but I've lived with worse than words. As long as I have you, the rest doesn't matter." "The preacher will come Saturday," he said. "Wouldn't do it in the church, some nonsense about propriety, but he'll perform the ceremony here." "That's perfect," Clara said, meaning it. "I'd rather be married here anyway, where we fell in love." Saturday dawned clear and bright. Clara had no wedding dress, but she'd carefully pressed her best blue calico and braided wildflowers into her hair. She left her bonnet hanging on its peg. She would marry Elias with her face uncovered, unashamed. Only a few witnessed the ceremony: Tom and the other ranch hands, Mrs. Hartley, who'd traveled from town despite the gossip, and, surprisingly, Doc Morrison, who'd tended Clara during her fever. "Wouldn't miss it," the old doctor said gruffly. About time Elias remembered how to smile. The preacher performed the service with obvious reluctance, racing through the words as if afraid someone might object, but Clara barely noticed. Her whole attention was on Elias, on the love shining in his eyes as he slipped his mother's ring onto her finger and promised to cherish her all their days. When the preacher pronounced them married and Elias kissed her in full view of everyone, Clara felt something shift inside her chest. The scared, scarred girl who'd hidden in shadows was still there, might always be there. But she was also this, a woman loved, chosen, celebrated. As their small party shared the wedding meal Clara had prepared, she caught her reflection in the window glass. Her scar was as prominent as ever, but it no longer seemed to define her. She was Clara Boone now, wife, partner, beloved. The rest was just skin and memory. That night, as she lay in her husband's arms in the bed they would now share, Clara touched the ring on her finger and marveled at the strange turns life could take. From ashes and agony had come this unexpected joy. It seemed almost too wonderful to trust. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That I'm happy," she said simply. "I'd forgotten what that felt like." "Get used to it," he murmured against her skin. "I plan to make you happy every day for the rest of our lives." And there in their mountain sanctuary, far from those who would judge or pity them, Clara believed him. Love had found them both in their brokenness and made something beautiful from the pieces. It was more than she'd ever dared hope for, and exactly what she'd needed all along. The first chill of autumn had settled over the ranch when Clara made her decision. For 2 months, she and Elias had lived in their private paradise, cherishing each day of married life. But paradise, she had learned, could become a prison when built on fear. It started with small things. Elias needed supplies from town, but found excuses to delay the trip. When the cattle buyer came to discuss prices, Elias met him at the property line rather than invite him to the house. Clara watched her husband build walls around their life, all in the name of protecting her, and felt something rebellious stir in her chest. "I need fabric for winter clothes," she announced one morning over breakfast. Elias looked up from his coffee. "Make a list. I'll fetch what you need next time I'm in town. I want to choose it myself." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Clara, I can't hide forever. Eli." She kept her voice gentle but firm. "We can't hide forever. We're not hiding. We're living our lives, peaceful and undisturbed. You're turning down business to avoid bringing people here. You rode 20 miles to the Henderson Ranch for that bull instead of having them deliver it." She reached across the table to take his hand. "This isn't living. It's existing in fear." He gripped her fingers. "I won't have people staring at you, whispering poison." "They'll do that whether I'm there or not. At least if I face them, they'll see I'm not ashamed." "You have nothing to be ashamed of. Then why are we acting like I do?" The question hung between them. Elias released her hand and pushed back from the table, pacing to the window. Clara watched his rigid shoulders and ached for the burden he'd taken on himself. "The Harvest Festival is next week," she said quietly. "The whole valley attends. We should go." "Clara, no. Yes." She rose and went to him, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "I spent 7 years hiding. Eli, you gave me the courage to stop. Don't ask me to start again." He turned in her embrace, cupping her face in his hands. "I just want to protect you." "I know, but you can't protect me from the world forever. And I don't want you to. I want to walk beside my husband with my head high. I want to buy fabric and talk to neighbors and live, truly live." She pressed her forehead to his. "Please. Trust me to be strong enough for this." His breath shuddered out. "You're the strongest person I know." "Then let me prove it." After a long moment, he nodded. "All right, we'll go to the festival." Clara kissed him, tasting surrender and fear and love all mingled together. "Thank you." The morning of the festival dawned crisp and bright. Clara dressed with care in her blue calico, the one she'd worn for their wedding. She brushed her hair until it shone, pinning it up properly, then stood before the mirror. Her hand hovered near the bonnet on its peg. "Leave it," Elias said from the doorway. He was dressed in his Sunday best, looking handsome and somewhat uncomfortable in the formal clothes. "You have nothing to hide." Clara dropped her hand. "Old habits." "I know." He crossed to her, offering his arm. "Ready?" "No," she admitted. "But let's go anyway." The ride to town seemed both endless and far too short. Clara's stomach churned with each mile, but she kept her chin up and her shoulders straight. Beside her on the wagon seat, Elias was a solid, reassuring presence. They heard the festival before they saw it, fiddle music, laughter, children shrieking with delight. The main street had been transformed with bunting and tables groaning under harvest bounty. The air smelled of apple cider and fresh pies. As their wagon rolled into view, a gradual hush fell over the crowd. Clara felt the weight of dozens of eyes, the buzz of whispers starting. Her scarred cheek burned as if freshly wounded. "Steady," Elias murmured, his hand finding hers. He helped her down from the wagon with formal courtesy, then tucked her hand firmly into the crook of his arm. Together, they walked into the crowd. The reactions were everything Clara had feared. Women pulled their children closer. Men stared openly. Conversations died as they passed, only to spring up again in their wake. Not quite quiet enough. Told you he'd hired a woman. That face, Lord have mercy. Must have been desperate to marry that. Elias's arm turned to iron beneath her hand. Clara squeezed gently, reminding him of his promise. No fights. Not today. Misses. Hartley appeared before them like a battleship cutting through water. "Clara, Mr. Boone! How wonderful to see you!" Her voice carried, pointed in its warmth. "Clara, you must see the quilt display. Mrs. Patterson would love your opinion on her stitching. Grateful for the lifeline." Clara allowed herself to be steered toward the quilts. Behind them, she heard Mrs. Hartley's voice again, sharp as a blade. "Martha Henderson, close your mouth before you catch flies. Yes, she has a scar. No, it's not catching. Honestly." At the quilt display, Clara forced herself to focus on the needlework, commenting on patterns and color choices. A few women responded tentatively to her observations. One, younger than the rest, even smiled. "That's beautiful work," Clara said, admiring a wedding ring quilt. "Thank you," the girl replied, then blushed and glanced around nervously. "I'm Sarah Winters. You're Mrs. Boone now, aren't you?" "I am." Sarah bit her lip, then leaned closer. "My brother came back from the war with terrible burns on his neck and arm. People stare at him, too. He says the staring eventually stops mattering." Clara felt her throat tighten. "He sounds wise." "He also says the people who matter don't care about scars, and the people who care don't matter." Sarah smiled shyly. "I think that's true, don't you?" Before Clara could answer, a commotion erupted near the pie table. A child, perhaps 5 or 6, had climbed onto a chair to reach a high shelf and was now teetering dangerously. Without thinking, Clara rushed forward, catching the boy just as the chair toppled. They landed in a heap on the ground, Clara cushioning his fall. The child looked up at her with wide eyes, taking in her face at close range. "You've got a big ouchie," he observed with the frank curiosity of childhood. "I do." Clara agreed, setting him on his feet and brushing off his clothes. "Are you hurt?" "Nope," he grinned, gap-toothed. "You caught me good. Thanks, lady." "Peter!" A woman rushed up, the child's mother. Clearly, she froze when she saw Clara, conflict clear on her face. Clara stood slowly, acutely aware of the crowd watching. "He's fine. Just a little too eager for pie." The woman's eyes darted to Clara's scar. Away, back again. Then something in her face softened. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for catching him. He's forever climbing where he shouldn't." "Boys will do that," Clara said, managing a small smile. The woman smiled back tentatively, then took her son's hand. As they walked away, Clara heard the boy's piping voice. "She was nice, Mama, even with the ouchie." The festival atmosphere gradually resumed around them. Clara found Elias by the livestock pens, deep in conversation with a rancher about breeding stock. His face lit up when he saw her. "All right?" he asked quietly. "Getting there," she said. As the afternoon wore on, the sharp edge of curiosity dulled. People still looked, still whispered, but Clara found she could bear it. Some even nodded politely when she passed. When the fiddler struck up a dancing tune and Elias led her onto the makeshift dance floor, she felt only a moment's panic at being so visible. "Eyes on me?" he murmured, spinning her into the first turn. "Just you and me." She focused on his face, on the love and pride she saw there, and let the rest fade away. They danced 3 songs before other couples joined them, the ice slowly breaking. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Clara found herself actually enjoying parts of the evening. She discussed preserving techniques with a group of ranch wives, listened to war stories from grizzled veterans, even judged a pie contest when the designated judge failed to appear. "Your husband's right proud of you," one old woman commented, nodding toward where Elias stood talking with other ranchers, his eyes frequently finding Clara in the crowd. "As he should be. Takes courage to face the world when it's been cruel to you." Clara touched her scar unconsciously. "I'm learning. Aren't we all? Child, aren't we all?" The festival was winding down when trouble finally found them. Clara had stepped away to the necessary, and when she emerged, 3 women blocked her path. She recognized one, the banker's wife, a pillar of propriety with a tongue sharp as alkali. "Mrs. Boone," the woman said, making the name sound like an insult. "We've been meaning to have a word." Clara straightened her spine. "Yes?" "It's about your situation. While we appreciate that you found employment with Mr. Boone—" "Marriage," Clara corrected quietly. "I found marriage with Mr. Boone." The woman's lips pursed. "Yes, well, some of us feel it would be more appropriate if you limited your public appearances. For the sake of the children, you understand, your appearance is quite disturbing." "No." The simple word stopped the woman mid-sentence. "I beg your pardon." "No," Clara repeated, surprised by her own calm. "I will not hide because my face makes you uncomfortable. I will not absent myself from life because you lack the grace to see past skin to soul." She stepped forward, and the women instinctively backed up. "I am Mrs. Elias Boone. I will shop in town, attend church if I choose, and participate in community events. If that disturbs you, I suggest you examine your own heart for the reason why." "Well," the banker's wife puffed up like an angry hen, "I never—" "No," Clara agreed. "You never survived what would have killed most, never found love despite loss, never learned that scars are just proof of survival, not marks of shame." She moved past them, then paused. "Good evening, ladies. Enjoy the rest of the festival." She walked away on trembling legs. Head high, behind her, she heard sputtering and indignant whispers, but they seemed very far away. She found Elias loading the wagon and collapsed against him. "Ready to go home?" he asked, wrapping strong arms around her. "Yes," she breathed. "More than ready." On the ride home, she told him about the confrontation. His hands tightened on the reins, but he listened without interrupting. "I'm proud of you," he said when she finished. "So damn proud I could burst. I don't know if I changed any minds. You changed yours. That's what matters." He pulled the wagon to a stop in their yard and turned to face her. "You were magnificent today, brave and gracious and beautiful. Let them whisper. Let them stare. They'll never be half the woman you are." Clara kissed him under the stars, tasting freedom on his lips. She had faced the worst and survived. The town might never fully accept her, but she no longer needed them to. She had Elias. She had her courage, and she had claimed her right to exist in the world without apology. That night, as she unpinned her hair and prepared for bed, Clara caught sight of her bonnet on its peg. On impulse, she took it down and walked outside. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the thin mountain air. She built a small fire in the yard and, without ceremony, dropped the bonnet into the flames. Elias joined her, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Together they watched the symbol of her hiding place turn to ash and drift away on the wind. "No more hiding," she said softly. "No more hiding," he agreed, pulling her close. The bonnet was gone, but Clara remained, scarred, strong, and finally, truly free. The change came gradually, like spring defeating winter one warm day at a time. After the harvest festival, Clara made a point of accompanying Elias to town every week. At first, the stares and whispers continued, but she met them with quiet dignity and steady eyes. Slowly, tentatively, the town began to see her as more than her scars. It helped that she had skilled hands and a generous heart. When the Petersons' youngest took fever and the doctor was 20 miles away tending a broken leg, Clara spent 3 days nursing the child with herbs and patient care. When Martha Henderson struggled with her new baby while recovering from a difficult birth, Clara appeared at her door with meals and capable assistance. She never announced these acts of kindness, simply appeared where need existed, did what was necessary, and slipped away. "That Mrs. Boone," she overheard one day while selecting fabric at the general store. "She's got healing hands. My Tommy might not have made it without her." Clara ducked her head to hide her smile, focusing on the bolt of green calico that would make a fine Christmas dress. The true transformation began on a cold November morning when young Billy Morrison came racing up to the ranch, his horse lathered with sweat. "Mrs. Boone," he gasped, sliding from the saddle. "Papa says come quick. There's been an accident at the mine. Cave in." "Men are trapped, and some that got out are hurt bad." Clara was already moving, gathering medical supplies into a basket. "How many hurt?" "Don't know. Ma'am, maybe a dozen. Doc Morrison's working on the worst of them. But he needs help. Eli's in the east pasture," she told the boy. "Tell him where I've gone." She saddled her mare with swift efficiency and rode hard for town. The scene at the mine was chaos, women weeping, men shouting orders, the injured laid out on blankets in the pale sun. Doc Morrison looked up from a miner whose leg bent at an unnatural angle. "Thank God," he said when he saw her. "I need another pair of hands. Can you handle blood?" "Yes." Clara tied her hair back and rolled up her sleeves. "Tell me what you need." For the next hours, she worked beside the doctor, cleaning wounds, setting bones, holding men still while they screamed. Her dress was soon stained with blood and dirt, but she never faltered. When a young miner cried for his mother as she stitched a gash on his forehead, she smoothed his hair and hummed the lullabies her own mother had sung. "You're an angel," he mumbled, catching her hand. "Don't care what anyone says, angel." By afternoon, Elias had arrived with extra supplies and strong backs to help move the injured. He found Clara bent over a miner with a crushed hand, carefully splinting each finger. "Proud of you," he murmured, pressing a cup of water into her free hand. She drank gratefully, then returned to her work. It was near dark when the last patient was tended. Clara stood slowly, her back protesting the hours of bending. Around her, families were gathering their injured, voices soft with gratitude. "Mrs. Boone." The mine foreman approached, hat in hand. "I want to thank you. Doc says we might have lost 3 or 4 men without your help. Anyone would have done the same." Clara said, suddenly exhausted. "No, ma'am, they wouldn't." He cleared his throat. "My wife's been one of them that whispered. I'm ashamed of that. Won't happen again." As Clara and Elias rode home through the darkening evening, she leaned against his shoulder, too tired to sit straight. "You did something important today," he said. "Changed hearts. I just helped where I could. That's how hearts change, one kindness at a time." Word of Clara's efforts at the mine spread quickly. The next Sunday, when she and Elias attended church for the first time since their marriage, the congregation shifted to make room, and several people nodded in greeting. The sermon was about the Good Samaritan, and Clara felt eyes on her. But for once, the attention didn't sting. After the service, Sarah Winters approached. "Mrs. Boone, some of us younger women are starting a quilting circle. We'd be honored if you'd join us." Clara blinked in surprise. Yes, I'd like that." "Wonderful. We meet Thursdays at my house, 2 o'clock. As Sarah walked away, Clara felt Elias's hand on her back, warm and supportive. "Look at you," he murmured, "making friends." "It's strange," she admitted. "I'd forgotten how." The quilting circle became a weekly brightness in Clara's routine. At first, she was quiet, focusing on her stitches, but gradually she began to share in the conversation. The women, mostly young wives and mothers, were curious but kind. They asked about her recipes, her gardening techniques, her skill with herbs. Nobody mentioned her scar after the first meeting. When Sarah had said simply, "We all have our burdens to bear. Here, we set them down for a while." Winter arrived in earnest, blanketing the valley in snow. Clara threw herself into preparations, preserving, mending, ensuring the ranch was ready for the long, cold months. She also found herself busier than ever with neighbors seeking her help. Her reputation as a healer grew with each successful treatment. One snowy evening, as she and Elias sat by the fire, he reading and she knitting, Clara felt a flutter in her belly. She'd been ignoring the signs for weeks, afraid to hope, but now, "Eli," she said softly. He looked up from his book. I think, that is, I'm fairly certain." She took a breath. "I'm with child." The book slipped from his hands. "What?" "A baby." Her hand went to her still flat stomach. "Come spring, I think." He was across the room in 2 strides, dropping to his knees beside her chair. "Truly, truly." His hands covered hers on her belly, and she saw tears in his eyes. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby. Are you happy?" "Happy?" He pulled her down into his arms, holding her like spun glass. "Clara, I don't have words. After Maggie and our son, I never thought—" His voice broke. She held him as he wept, understanding the collision of joy and grief, hope and fear. When his storm passed, they sat together on the rug before the fire, planning and dreaming. "The child will need a strong name," Elias said, "something that speaks to survival, to hope." "If it's a girl," Clara said carefully, "I'd like to call her Faith." "Faith," he repeated. "Yes. And if it's a boy." They debated names until the fire burned low, then went to bed wrapped in the warmth of their secret. But secrets, Clara had learned, had a way of revealing themselves. Her pregnancy became obvious as winter gave way to spring. The reactions in town ranged from genuine pleasure to barely concealed speculation about whether the child would bear its mother's scars. Clara ignored the worst of it, focusing instead on the growing life within her and the tender joy on Elias's face when he felt the baby move. The quilting circle threw themselves into creating baby clothes and blankets. Sarah Winters, pregnant with her own first child, became Clara's closest confidant. They compared symptoms, shared fears, and bolstered each other's courage. "Were you scared?" Sarah asked one afternoon as they stitched tiny gowns. "When you first knew?" "Terrified," Clara admitted. "Still am sometimes, but Eli reminds me that love is stronger than fear. My mother says the same." Sarah bit off a thread. "She also says babies don't care about scars or beauty. They just want love and milk and clean diapers." Clara laughed. "Wise woman." As her pregnancy advanced, Clara found movement increasingly difficult. The summer heat didn't help, making her swollen and uncomfortable. But she persisted in her daily routines, finding joy in small things, the baby's kicks, Elias's wonder at her changing body, the gradual transformation of the spare room into a nursery. One blazing July day, she was returning from the henhouse when she saw a familiar figure at the gate. Her breath caught. The woman was older, grayer, worn by years of hard living, but Clara would have known her anywhere. "Aunt Catherine?" Her mother's sister turned, and Clara saw recognition bloom across her weathered face. "Clara, child, is it really you?" They met in the yard, embracing carefully around Clara's bulk. Catherine pulled back to study her niece, taking in the scar without flinching. "We thought you were dead," Catherine whispered. "When we heard about the fire, went to find you. They said you died too." "Nearly did." Clara touched her scar. "But Father Morrison saved me. Took me to the church in Willow Creek. All these years." Catherine shook her head. "Your mother would be so glad to know you survived." They sat on the porch, sharing 7 years of separated life. Catherine had married a wheelwright, lived in Denver now. She'd never stopped wondering, hoping. And now look at you, Catherine said, gesturing at Clara's obvious pregnancy. Married, with a baby coming. Your mother always said you were stronger than you knew. Elias returned from the fields to find the women deep in conversation. Clara introduced them, watching her husband's easy charm work on her aunt. You'll stay for supper, Elias said, making it not quite a question. Clara's been needing family around her. Over the meal, Catherine shared stories of Clara's mother, memories Clara had thought lost forever. As night fell and Catherine prepared to leave, promising to return for the baby's birth, Clara walked her to the gate. I'm proud of you, Catherine said softly. Not for surviving. Anyone with luck can do that. But for living, for choosing joy despite the pain, your mother would be so proud. After Catherine's departure, Clara felt a shift inside herself, as if a circle had closed. She had family again, a connection to her past that didn't only speak of loss. August arrived with thunderstorms and sweltering heat. Clara moved slowly now, her body heavy with promise. The baby was active, constantly shifting and kicking, as if eager to meet the world. Elias fussed over her, trying to take on her chores despite her protests. I'm pregnant, not dying, she said one morning, finding him attempting to milk the cow. You're due any day. Doc Morrison said. Doc Morrison hasn't carried a child. Clara interrupted, then winced as a pain shot across her back. Though perhaps you're right about the cow. He was at her side instantly. Is it time? No, just practice, I think. But as the day wore on, the pains grew stronger and more regular. By evening, Clara had to admit the truth. You'd better send for the doctor, and Mrs. Hartley. If she'll come, Elias said firmly. Tom, saddle up. The next hours blurred together, pain and pressure. Elias's worried face, Mrs. Hartley's calm directions, Doc Morrison's steady presence. Clara fought through each contraction, drawing on the same strength that had carried her through fire and healing. I can see the head, Doc Morrison announced. One more push, Clara. She bore down with everything she had, and suddenly the room filled with a new sound, the indignant wail of a newborn. It's a girl, Mrs. Hartley said, tears in her eyes. A perfect little girl. Clara reached for her daughter with shaking hands. The baby was small but fierce, her cries strong and demanding. As Clara counted tiny fingers and toes, she searched the little face for signs of damage, marks of her mother's scars. She's perfect, Elias breathed, touching the baby's cheek with one trembling finger. Look at her, Clara, she's absolutely perfect. Faith, Clara whispered. Faith, Margaret Boone. The baby quieted at her mother's voice, dark eyes trying to focus. In that moment, Clara understood something fundamental. Her daughter would grow up in a world where her mother didn't hide, where scars were just part of the story, not the whole of it. Faith would know that beauty came in many forms, that strength could rise from ashes, that love saw past surface to soul. Thank you, Elias murmured, kissing Clara's temple. For our daughter, for our life, for everything. Clara leaned into him, their daughter cradled between them, and felt the last walls around her heart crumble. She was exposed, visible, vulnerable, and completely, utterly unafraid. Faith Margaret Boone entered the world during the worst thunderstorm of the summer, but she emerged calm and alert, as if storms were simply part of life's natural rhythm. In the weeks that followed, Clara discovered her daughter had inherited more than just her dark hair. The child possessed a serenity that seemed to quiet the most troubled hearts. She doesn't cry like other babies, Sarah Winters observed during a visit, her own infant son wailing in her arms. It's like she knows everything will be all right. Clara adjusted Faith in her arms, watching her daughter's eyes track the light from the window. She's teaching me that too. Word of Faith's birth spread through the valley, bringing unexpected visitors. Women who had once whispered about Clara appeared at the ranch with baby gifts and genuine smiles. Even the banker's wife, her previous hostility apparently forgotten, arrived with an exquisite christening gown. "Every child deserves to be welcomed properly," she said stiffly. But Clara caught the softening around her eyes when Faith grasped her finger. The change was subtle but real. Where once Clara's scar had been all people saw, now they saw a mother, a healer, a neighbor. The scar remained, would always remain, but it had become just one part of her story rather than the defining chapter. One crisp autumn morning, Clara sat on the porch with Faith, reading aloud from one of the books Elias had ordered from Denver. The baby, though only 3 months old, seemed to listen intently, her eyes fixed on her mother's face. "You're starting early with the education," Elias commented, joining them with coffee. "Mother always said a love of learning begins in the cradle." Clara smiled at the memory. She read to me even before I could understand the words. "Our daughter will be brilliant then." He sat beside them, one arm around Clara's shoulders. "Like her mother." "Clara!" a voice called from the gate. Young Timothy Peterson came running, his face flushed with urgency. "Ma says come quick. There's a woman at our place, hurt bad. She's asking for you specifically." Clara's brow furrowed. "Asking for me? Yes, ma'am. Says she knew you before. She's in a bad way, been beaten. Ma thinks—" Clara was already moving, passing Faith to Elias. "I'll get my supplies." "I'm coming with you," Elias said firmly. They rode swiftly to the Peterson farm, Faith secure in a sling across Elias's chest. What they found there made Clara's breath catch. The woman huddled on the Petersons' kitchen floor was barely recognizable beneath the bruises and dirt, but Clara knew her instantly. Mary. She knelt beside her childhood friend, the one who had recoiled from her scars years ago in Willow Creek. "Mary Sullivan?" "Clara," Mary whispered through split lips. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know where else to go." "Hush now. Let me see." Clara's hands moved gently over injuries that spoke of systematic cruelty. Broken ribs, dislocated shoulder, wounds both fresh and healing. "Who did this?" "My husband?" The word came out bitter. "The man my father chose. Said I was getting above myself. Needed correcting." Clara worked in focused silence, setting bones and cleaning wounds while Mrs. Peterson heated water and tore bandages. Elias stood guard at the door, his presence a silent promise of protection. "Why did you come looking for me?" Clara asked as she splinted Mary's fingers. After everything," Mary's swollen eyes filled with tears. "I heard stories about the woman with the scarred face who helps people, who doesn't turn anyone away. I didn't know it was you until I got close enough to see." She caught Clara's hand. "I was cruel to you. After the fire, I was young and stupid and afraid. But that's no excuse. Why are you helping me?" "Because you need help," Clara said simply. "And because holding on to hurt is like holding hot coals. You're the only one who burns." Mary wept then, great gulping sobs that shook her battered frame. Clara held her, this woman who had once been her dearest friend, who had fled from her disfigurement, and felt the last bitter knot of resentment dissolve. They brought Mary back to the ranch, settling her in the spare room over the following weeks. As Mary healed in body and spirit, an unexpected friendship bloomed, not the easy companionship of their youth, but something deeper, tempered by pain and understanding. "You've changed," Mary said one afternoon, watching Clara tend the garden with Faith babbling in a basket nearby. "Not just the outside. You're stronger, surer. Fire does that," Clara replied, straightening to ease her back. "Burns away what's weak, leaves what's essential. I want to be like that, strong." "You are. You left him. That took courage." Mary stayed through winter, helping with the household and learning Clara's healing skills. She adored Faith, often holding the baby while Clara worked, watching them together. Elias remarked, "She's good with her, natural. She always wanted children." Clara said, "Perhaps someday, when she's ready, when she's healed." He pulled Clara close. "You've given her that chance." Spring arrived with its usual mountain fickleness, warm one day, snowing the next. Faith was crawling now, exploring her world with determined curiosity. She showed no fear of strangers, reaching for every visitor with chubby arms and drooping smiles. "She's going to be a beauty," Sarah Winters said during a quilting circle meeting now held at Clara's ranch. "But more than that, look how she studies everything. Those eyes don't miss much." Clara watched her daughter pull herself up on a chair leg, brow furrowed in concentration. "She's persistent, I'll say that. Like her mother." "Mrs." Hartley added with a warm smile. The older woman had become a regular visitor, often bringing news from town along with her knitting. "Speaking of news," Sarah leaned forward conspiratorially. "Have you heard about the new school teacher? Miss Davis up and married that railroad surveyor, leaving us without anyone for the fall term. The school board is desperate." Several women turned to look at Clara. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Why are you all staring at me?" "You can read and write better than anyone," Sarah said. "You're patient with children. You're already teaching half the valley's youngsters their letters when their mothers bring them here." "I couldn't. My face." "Your face is fine." "Mrs." Hartley interrupted briskly. "Children see truth, not surfaces. They'd be lucky to have you." The idea took root despite Clara's protests. That evening, she discussed it with Elias as they prepared for bed. "You'd be wonderful," he said immediately. "You always said you wanted to teach? That was before, when I thought I could be normal." He caught her hands, pulling her to face him. "Clara Boone, you are the least normal woman I know. You're extraordinary, and those children need someone extraordinary. What about Faith, the ranch? Mary's here to help, and the schoolhouse is only 3 miles, close enough to come home midday if needed." He cupped her face, thumb tracing the familiar path of her scar. "You've spent 2 years showing this valley who you really are. This is just the next step." Clara leaned into his touch, considering. The thought of standing before a classroom, exposed to the innocent cruelty children could show, terrified her. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Excitement, purpose, the ghost of an old dream refusing to die. "I'll think about it," she said. She thought about little else for days. When the school board president appeared at her door the following week, hat literally in hand, she heard herself saying yes before her fear could override her courage. September found Clara standing before 15 children ranging from 6 to 16. Her hands trembling only slightly as she wrote her name on the board. The students stared openly at her scar. She'd expected nothing less. But when young Peter Morrison, the same boy she'd caught at the Harvest Festival 2 years prior, raised his hand, it wasn't to ask about her face. "Mrs. Boone, my ma says you know all about plants and healing. Will you teach us that too?" Yes, if you'd like." "Good," Peter said decisively. "Might need to know that stuff someday." And just like that, the ice broke. The children were curious about everything, not just letters and numbers, but the wider world Clara could show them. She taught them to read with stories of faraway places, to figure with practical problems about crops and cattle, to write by having them compose letters to Faith, who she sometimes brought to class in her basket. Education should prepare you for life, she told them, not just fill your heads with facts you'll never use. The students thrived under her patient guidance. Parents who had initially been skeptical found their children coming home excited about learning, full of questions and new ideas. Even the most reluctant scholars found something to capture their interest in Clara's classroom. One November afternoon, as early snow dusted the mountains, Clara was teaching geography when a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. The bonnet was gone, but she recognized the posture, the way of holding oneself apart. "Class," Clara said calmly, though her heart raced. "Please continue copying your maps. I'll return in a moment." She stepped onto the schoolhouse porch, closing the door behind her. The woman turned, and Clara found herself looking at a face much like her own, scarred, marked by fire, transformed by survival. "I heard about you," the woman said softly. "About a teacher who doesn't hide what she is, Who shows children that different doesn't mean less than... She touched her own scarred cheek. I've been hiding for 10 years. Maybe it's time to stop. Clara reached out, taking the woman's hands. What's your name? Ruth? Ruth Baker. Well, Ruth Baker. Would you like to come in and meet my students? They're studying geography today, and I could use another perspective on the world. Ruth's smile transformed her damaged features. I'd like that very much. As Clara led Ruth into the warm classroom, she caught sight of their reflection in the window, 2 women marked by fire, standing tall and unashamed behind them. Children's voices rose in the familiar rhythm of learning, while beyond the glass, snow began to fall in earnest, blanketing the world in fresh possibility. That evening, Clara sat by her own hearth, Faith toddling between her parents with determined steps. The old bonnet was long gone, burned to ash and scattered to the wind. In its place had grown a life rich with purpose, teaching, healing, loving, living fully visible in the world. What are you thinking about? Elias asked, catching Faith as she stumbled. Beginnings, Clara said. How sometimes what seems like an ending is really just the start of something better. Our beginning was pretty good, he said, settling beside her with Faith in his lap. The best, Clara agreed, leaning into his warmth. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside their home, all was warmth and light. Faith babbled happily, pointing at the window where snowflakes danced like tiny stars. Clara followed her daughter's gaze and smiled. Once, she had hidden from the world, convinced her scars made her unworthy of love, of life, of joy. Now she knew better. Scars were just the map of survival, proof of battles fought and won. They were part of her story, but not the whole of it. The whole of it was here, in her husband's arms, her daughter's laughter, her students' eager faces, her community's acceptance, her own brave heart that had learned to stop hiding and start living. Tell me a story, Mama, Faith said, her first full sentence clear as mountain air. Clara gathered her daughter close, feeling Elias's arm come around them both. Once upon a time, she began, there was a woman who thought she needed to hide her face from the world. But then she learned something wonderful, that love sees with the heart, not the eyes. And when she stopped hiding, she found a life more beautiful than any dream. Good story, Faith pronounced, settling deeper into her mother's arms. The best, Elias agreed, pressing a kiss to Clara's temple, because it's true. And there, in their home built on trust and tenderness, with snow falling soft outside and love warming them within. Clara knew he was right. It was true, every word of it. The fire had taken much from her all those years ago, but from the ashes had risen something stronger, brighter, more beautiful than what had been before. She had learned to stop hiding beneath a bonnet and start living beneath the vast, accepting sky. And that, Clara thought as her family settled close around her, was the greatest lesson of all. That shame could be transformed to strength, that scars could become symbols of survival, and that love, true love, always found a way to see past the surface to the shining soul within. Thank you all for listening to this tale of love, courage, and redemption in the Old West. If you're hearing this story, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of the American frontier. And please share your thoughts about Clara and Elias's journey. Your comments and discussions make these stories come alive. Until next time, partners, keep your fires burning bright and your hearts open to adventure.